Welcome back, handymen and women, to the Bulletproof Handyman Business YouTube channel. Today I've got a very good one for you. We're going to go over the top 10 most profitable handyman jobs. So these are going to be the jobs you're going to put the least amount of time and effort into for the most amount of money. And these are going to be your bread and butter. These are going to be all that filler in between the complex jobs that make sure that your bank account keeps getting filled up. So without further ado, number 10 is going to be fascia replacement. The reason number 10 is so profitable is because most of the handymen you find out there are not carpenters, and they're not going to be comfortable replacing fascia. I found that once I did 1 or 2 fascia jobs for any given property manager, the first time that job came up and I knocked it out, after that I just started getting more and more and more, because they don't really have anybody else reliable to send it to. And you can charge a pretty fair amount for these because they don't have anyone else to send it to. If they need to hire a framer or a professional carpenter, those guys are going to be charging even more than you are, because they're busy either building houses, which pays extremely well, or building porches and things like that for a much higher end clientele. So they're not going to be bothered to go replace 2 feet of rotten fascia. So with these jobs, I found you can't be unfair, but you can really charge just about whatever you want. And once you get a system down for it and you understand what tools you need and you get your process set up, these can be extremely fast jobs to take care of as well. And then one more caveat with fascia is you can match the paint on those real quick on the job and make sure it's painted, but then you can go ahead and send them an estimate, a separate estimate, to paint all of the fascia. And the reason that you're going to make that a separate estimate is because that can typically be done in one day, and it can typically be done with not more than $200 worth of materials. So if you have a $1,000 limit like I do here and like many states do for an unlicensed handyman, then you can send that extra estimate at the end, and you can charge roughly $800 in labor and then about $200 for materials to go back and paint all the fascia on the house. You've stayed under your $1,000 limit, you've added more work, and you got $800 for that day, plus you got paid real well on the day that you replaced the fascia. Number 9 is going to be sliding closet doors. These are the ones that have the wheels on top that roll on the rollers up here. These fall off all the time. They're abused all the time. I find that they're not typically installed correctly. They're missing one very specific screw that's intended to keep them from getting out of adjustment. So 9 times, maybe 8 times out of 10, you're going to show up, and all you're really going to need to do is just adjust the wheel. You're just going to raise the door up a little so it's not dragging on the carpet. Pop that door back into the rails and just put that final screw in. And that final screw, it's just going through a hole that doesn't have an adjustment on it, so it's going to hold that door in place forever. Now, if your rail is a little bit damaged, some of the times you can go ahead and bend that back into shape. If it's a little worse than that, then before you show up to the job, and this is just a good piece of inventory to always have, is just have one of those rails, preferably a 62-inch or larger one. You won't find many of these closets with an opening larger than that. So if you have the rail with you already, number 1, you're going to be charging your $125 or whatever your trip fee is to fix these doors. So if it is just an adjustment and popping the screws in at the right place, if that's all it is, you're going to get your $125 for maybe 15 minutes work max. If you have to replace the headrail, yes, that is more work, but now you're going to charge more money because it's more work, and you showed up with a headrail. And regardless of the width of the closet door opening, as long as you have a very large one with you at all times, all you've got to do is just get out any metal cutting blade or a grinder with a cutoff wheel, cut it to size, take the old one out, it's 4 or 5 screws, pop the new one back in, and then put your doors back on and get them adjusted. Now you're charging more because you replaced the headrail, or you're charging your regular trip fee for 15 minutes of work. And that's an extremely common job that I do all the time. Number 8 is leaky sinks and leaky faucets. So I just put these together because anything that's in the kitchen that's leaking poses a danger to the cabinets, and that can get very expensive to fix. So you can jump on these real fast anytime you get them. Now, if it's a leaky faucet, most of the time I end up just replacing the faucet, and the reason for that is because here, at least in Tucson, our water is so hard that typically if the faucet's leaking, it's because a packing has been essentially sanded down. And the reason it's been sanded down is we get a whole lot of calcium and whatnot and lime in our water that ends up getting on the internal components of your faucet. And that water, that hard water that gets on there, acts like a sandpaper on the packings. And 9 times out of 10, they're just old faucets anyways, and they kind of need to be changed. They're already getting corroded on the outside as well. So if you replace that faucet, that means hopefully, if you do, like I've told you in other videos, you need to have an inventory, and part of that inventory should be one standard faucet that you're going to throw in most of your homes, unless you need something special for that home because it has something special in it. But if you change that faucet, you can get that done real quick, and that's profitable. But what's more profitable is when it's a leaky sink or drain pipe plumbing rather than the faucet, because typically these you can also take care of in about 15 minutes. They're nearly always going to be just the drain, the plastic drain plumbing beneath, and for that all you really need to do is disconnect your plumbing at the bottom of the sink where your strainer basket is, disconnect your plumbing where it goes into the wall to the drain, and you just want to take that stuff apart real quick, take your gaskets off, get some new gaskets that you should always have with you, clean the pipe up just a little bit with a rag, put your new gaskets on, put everything back together. That leak is going to be gone for sure if that's where it came from, and then you can just get on out of there again in about 15 minutes for your full trip fee. And like I said, yeah, every now and then if it's the faucet, you may end up being there like 30 minutes to replace the faucet, but when you combine these together to just leaking at the kitchen sink from anywhere, when you put all those together, you're almost always going to be spending 15 minutes, maybe 20 to 25 at the most, but you're going to be getting your trip fee or more than your trip fee because this is plumbing. So depending on your property manager, depending on the property management company, and what kind of pricing they're used to receiving from you, you can charge $150, even $165 sometimes for those. Next, number 7, cabinet bottoms. These are sink cabinet bottoms and vanity cabinet bottoms. I'm sure you've all seen where they get leaks and then it messes the bottom of the cabinet up, usually rots out some particular portion or the whole thing is just sunk down in and you need to replace that. Now you can come up with your own system, and I will be doing a video on my system eventually. There's kind of a half-assed one of my system that I put out a while back. It's not a great one, but I'll be redoing that video when I get the next opportunity at a vacant house so I can really show you how I do it. But I've gotten that down. A very high quality product, by the way. I've gotten down to absolutely less than a 30-minute process. The materials are about $40, and I charge $250 to do it. So call it $210 for labor for essentially a 30-minute job. These always go the same. There's maybe 1 out of 20 is going to be a corner cabinet, which is going to take you a little more time. But again, if it takes you a little more time, you can charge a little more money for that. But these guys, you're making $200 in about 30 minutes. Next, number 6. Leaky roofs. Now I'm going to add a caveat to this. I do not do slate roofs and tile roofs. If it's any sort of like solid masonry sort of roof, I don't mess with those. The reason I don't mess with them is because they're just so porous. There's so many different places they could leak. There's so many ways they could be leaking. And a lot of times the proper fix for that involves taking half of the roof apart. So when you show up for those, if the fix is going to require a day's worth of work to get a whole lot of tile off the roof, you're not going to be able to do that day because you probably have other jobs scheduled and you're going to need approval for that amount of labor, so you end up leaving the job not having fixed the problem. And my policy is if I haven't fixed the problem, you're not getting an invoice, or you're getting a $0 invoice. But leaky roofs, so I won't accept the job if it's a tile or slate roof. The caveat to that also being if you're a favorite property manager that I have some loyalty to, I might give it a shot just to maintain our relationship and our loyalty with each other. But otherwise, you show up to a leaky roof and it's either shingles or it's a flat roof, if that's what you're showing up to. Generally, identifying the source of the leak is not going to be very hard. It's usually going to be something obvious up there. And generally, the fix is going to be, if it's a flat roof, you can do a very proper, very permanent fix right there on the spot. And that fix is going to be, for me, 3 layers of fiberglass tape. They make this tape. It's about 6 inches wide and as long as you want it. 3 layers of this fiberglass mesh tape sandwiched with 3 layers of siliconized roof sealant. This is the high dollar stuff. It does cost a lot of money to buy initially, but let's say you pay, I don't know, $85 for a 1 gallon can, and that seems like a lot because there's other roof patch stuff in a 1 gallon can that you can pay $35 or $40 for. But you pay $85, maybe even $100 for this can. This can is going to get you through, let's say, a minimum of 10 small patches. Usually the area you're patching is not bigger than a square foot, so you're going to get 10 of those. So now you've spent $10 in materials each. Charge $20 or $25 materials each, and then you've taken care of that expense of the materials. That's not something you need to worry about. The good news is, if it's a leaky roof, you got called because there's a current leak, because it rained yesterday or today, and the tenant reported it immediately, and it needs to be fixed immediately. This is not always an emergency job. Like if it's a big storm and water's pouring through the ceiling, that might be an emergency. But otherwise, this is still a high priority job. You do what you need to do to make sure you get over there and you get that fixed the day of or the next day. And then you charge something in the ballpark of $175 to $225 to do that patch. The reason for that also is most handymen, one of two things: either don't do roofing, don't know how, don't want to, that's just not a job that they take, or number two, they do get roofing jobs, but unfortunately what most of them do is just go slather on the cheapest roof sealant they can find. And what will always happen if they do that is that leak is, especially if you're here in Tucson where you have monsoon seasons, or any part of the country where you have seasonal rains, what's going to happen is that leak is going to stop right then and there, but as soon as the sun comes out and dries things up and heats things up, that cheap stuff they slathered on is going to crack. And the next rain, or the rain after that, or the rain after that, it's going to leak again. And those property managers learn not to send those handymen on those jobs. So once you do a good job with a leaky roof that other guys can't do and won't do, once you do that, you can charge, like I said, about $175 to $225, and that's not going to raise anyone's eyebrows. That's to make sure a home doesn't continue to get damaged by rain coming inside. And while you're there, make sure you go inside, and if you need to, open up a hole in the ceiling so that it can dry out in there, because you're going to need to come back and do a drywall patch. So you can open up that hole, you can take your measurements, you can take a sample for your paint match for when you come back to do that drywall patch later on in the future, and then you give them an estimate for that, and you now get to return to do yet another difficult job that a lot of handymen are not great at or won't even try to do, or that they do but the property managers have noticed they don't do a good job of, which is why you're charging a little more, because you are doing a good job of those patches. So that one leaky roof results in a very nice invoice for the leaky roof. It also results in a future trip for a job that you can charge more than average on. So leaky roofs are a really good one for sure. Moving on to number 5. We're getting closer to the biggest and most important ones. Number 5 is exterior doors that won't latch or lock. You're going to have, especially again, as the seasons change and things heat up or cool down and the humidity changes, you're going to have doors sometimes that are going to move around a little bit, and suddenly the tenant won't be able to close the door and have it latch, or you're going to have a doorknob or a deadbolt that just won't lock. Now I'll tell you for sure, more than 9 times out of 10, like 95% of the time, you're going to fix this with one of 2 fixes. Fix number 1 is going to simply be replacing a doorknob or a deadbolt. That's something you want to have in your inventory. I use the quick set rekeyable ones, but know before you go, via the tenant, what color and style your doorknob and deadbolt is, and make sure that when you show up, you've already got that with you, because you don't want to be making that Home Depot trip. It's not a profitable job anymore if you had to go to Home Depot. But show up with a doorknob and deadbolt that match, and if it's just the doorknob or deadbolt, then you swap it out and you rekey it to match the existing. This is a 5 to 7 minute job at most, and you're out of there for your $125 trip fee. Now the second cause is going to be simply that things aren't aligned, and to repair things not being aligned, first you're going to check the hinges, and you're just going to make sure that they're solid and that they're tight, because sometimes they loosen up over time, and that will move the door out of alignment with where the latches need to latch. So check your hinges, tighten them down if you need to. Once you know your hinges are good, you're just going to look at your latch and at your deadbolt, and you're going to see if they're lined up with the frame, with the strike plates on the frame. And if they're not, you're simply going to realign your strike plates. Sometimes this will mean that you need to chisel out a little bit of wood for where you've moved it to if you had to move it, but most of the time it's just going to be taking the screws out, filling the holes that the screws were in with some sort of wood. And the reason for this is because you're not going to move it very far, and you can't put a screw in 1 millimeter from its old hole. It's just going to fall back into its old hole. So you take the screws out, you fill the holes in, you get the latch plate where it needs to be, the strike plate where it needs to be, and then you put your screws back in and you test the door, and you're done. Both of these fixes, either one of them, doesn't matter which one it is, typically you're going to be in and out of there, like parking in front of the house, all the way until you're driving away from the house is going to be less than 20 minutes, and you're going to get your $125 trip fee. And we've got 4 more, plus a bonus category at the end that's actually the most profitable. But before we get to those, I do want to remind y'all, I run my entire business with Jobber. My entire business, it's all I need. It is the best software out there for doing what I do. There's a link in the description for a free trial. Right now, at the time of filming this video, it's 40% off for the first 3 months. Now, if you're watching this months and months down the line, they may have some other sale, they may not. But at the time that I'm putting this video out, it's 40% off for the first 3 months. Also, I'm on Twitter. That's where we're doing like our handyman hangout. A bunch of us get together and we just discuss things. That's sort of our community page, separate from the How to Run the Business YouTube channel. Also in the description, I have an Amazon storefront, and in this store is every single tool that you will ever need to run your handyman business. And I do mean every single tool that you will ever need to run your handyman business. And then finally, I do have a lot of documents available for y'all that might be handy in starting or improving your business. And there is a request link. They are free, no charge for anything at all. That's my policy. If you need it to run your business, there is no charge for me providing you with that information. There's a request link where you can request those documents and I'll get them sent to you. So, moving on to number 4, toilets that won't stop running. One of our most common issues that we just constantly get work orders for. And the good news on this is every single time, if the toilet isn't leaking and making the floor wet, which you'll be told beforehand that the toilet's leaking, if it's just running, it's only one of 2 solutions. Either a new fill valve or a new flapper, and my policy is I just do both. If I'm doing the flapper, I'm going to throw a new fill valve in. If I'm doing the fill valve, I'm going to throw a new flapper in. Materials on these are extremely cheap, and both of those can get done easily in less than 15 minutes. Once you have the process and you've done a few, you will never spend more than 15 minutes on these. And again, you're going to get that $125 trip fee or more, but at least your $125 trip fee for 15 minutes worth of work. Number 3, smoke detectors. Now these sometimes can take you up to 30 minutes depending on whether you're being called out there because one is beeping or because all of them in the house just need to be inspected in general. But once you do the smoke detectors, the great thing about these is that it's easy to keep the inventory on hand because you only need 2 types. You're going to need the hardwired smoke detectors, or you're going to need, if you're me, the Kitty 10-year battery-operated smoke detectors. Those are guaranteed for 10 years, so that's the only ones I put in. But very few homes, if hardly any, very few have more than 6. So if you have 6 of each with you all the time, and you've got any kind of work order for smoke detectors, you can show up and from the get-go know that the worst-case scenario is you're installing 6 new smoke detectors. And even if you do need to do all 6, again, guys, maybe 20 minutes at the most. And what's even better is if it's just one that's beeping, you're just going to replace the battery. Or if it's just one that's broken somehow or another, if it's just the one, you're in and out of there in 5 minutes. I've actually got a video on this channel of me swapping one out in 1 minute. Now, of course, that 1 minute didn't include opening the box, getting the detector out, setting my ladder up. But the actual process, once you're in the house with your ladder and your tools, 1 minute to change a smoke detector out, and you're going to get that trip fee again. And my policy is I do up to 5 for the $125 trip fee, and then after 5, I add $25 per smoke detector on top of that. And number 2, getting closer to number 1, and then the bonus at the end. Number 2, garbage disposals. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen on every single garbage disposal you ever do, at least 99 out of 100. You go in, you open up the cabinet, you already have your 1/4-inch Allen wrench in your hand with you. You open up the cabinet, you reach to the center of the garbage disposal. In the very dead center where the armature is, you're going to stick that 1/4-inch wrench. There's going to be a 1/4-inch hole there that it's going to fit into, and crank it back and forth. You'll hear if there's stuff stuck in there, and you'll feel it grinding. And you crank it loose, and then on the underside of there is also a reset button. It's basically a circuit breaker so that it doesn't overheat and catch on fire. If it's getting too much juice going through it and it can't turn, that breaker's going to trip. So you're just going to take your wrench, open up the cabinet, stick it in the middle, crank it left and right 2 or 3 times, hit that switch, come up above to the countertop, hit the switch on the wall that turns the garbage disposal on. One of 2 things will happen. Either it will turn on or it will not turn on. If it does turn on, then you're good to go now, and all you've got to do is turn it back off, reach in there and get any debris that's left out, fill that sink up with water, and then pull the plug with the disposal running so you flush it all through, in which case this is a 5-minute job. Or it's not going to turn on, and it's because either it's not getting power to the outlet down below, which I have never seen happen, but I admit could happen eventually someday. However, if it doesn't run, you're either not getting power, which is not going to be the case, or you need a new garbage disposal. That's another item you should always have on you with your inventory. Every time you use one, you buy another one the next time you're in Home Depot, or you buy 3 at a time. Doesn't matter how you work it, but you always have one on you. And if you do have one on you, that 1 time out of 10 that you need to swap the garbage disposal, even that, once you've done a few, is less than a 30-minute job. So when you average out the 1 in 10 that's a 30-minute job, and then the 9 in 10 that were literally just a 5-minute job, this is an insanely profitable job here. It's one of my absolute favorites because I don't need to guess what tools I need. I don't need to worry about how much time is this going to take because I need to schedule the next job to come after that, but I don't know if it'll be 2 hours or 5 minutes. No, it's always going to be 5 minutes, and the only exception to that rule is when it's 30 minutes, and you can call your next tenant and say, hey, I'm running just a few minutes late, but I'll be there soon. It's a great job. So that was garbage disposals. And finally, number 1, and maybe this is tied with number 2, but just in my experience, electrical troubleshooting, specifically of outlets, but electrical troubleshooting in general, can be very profitable. Typically, if you're doing electrical troubleshooting, it's because someone's reporting an outlet is not working. Now, sometimes it's going to be that an exterior light fixture is not working, in which case it's oftentimes the cause of that is going to be the photo sensor is either broke or it's somehow receiving light. Like say somebody else put in a new porch light and it's now shining on that photo sensor, so their porch light isn't coming on. There's a lot of things it could be, but I'd say at least 80% of the time it's going to just simply be an outlet that's not working. And there's also a good sequence of troubleshooting events that you can go through. They're going to help you figure this out quick. Number 1, you're going to check the breakers, obviously. And when you check the breakers, don't assume that if it's tripped, it's going to be moved over to the left or the right. That's not always the case. The very first thing you're going to do is let the tenant know you're going to turn all the breakers off and back on. Then you're going to go to the main breaker panel. You're going to shut the main breaker off first because you don't want everything in their house popping all around. So shut that main breaker off first, and then go down the line and every single breaker turn it off and back on about 3 times. If there's any corrosion on the back side of those breakers, sometimes it'll knock them off, but it also just makes sure that you get a feel for those clicks and you know for sure if one is working or not. And then, once you get all those breakers turned off and back on, you're going to be very quiet, and you're going to reach up, and you're going to pop that main breaker back on. And if anything in the house is, say something is shorted, something bad is going on, and that breaker trips again, you're standing right there. So you flip it on, and it should take at least a quarter second, maybe a little bit less, but enough difference between when you flip the main on and when your breaker, your bad one, if there is a bad one, trips. it's going to happen very quickly, but separately from that main breaker, and you can hear that, and then you can search for which breaker it is if you didn't notice which breaker it is as you were resetting things. Once you've taken care of the breaker, the next thing you're going to do is you're always going to have your outlet tester, and you're just going to go ahead and go in the house and plug that outlet tester into whatever outlet they say is bad. That's going to give you a lot of information. Typically, it's going to tell you what's wrong most of the time, and you're going to be just pulling that outlet out, most likely, and just tightening down some wires. Something's going to have come loose. Now, if that's not the case, let's say you plug your outlet tester in, and there is no result from you having plugged that in, then you're going to go to the other outlets in the room, down the hallway, anywhere kind of nearby, and you're going to test those just to make sure that those look good, because you may find that one of them is also bad, but it's going to have the code on the tester that's going to tell you how to fix it, and once you fix it, your original is fixed. Now, another trick, especially if it's anywhere near the kitchen, the bathroom, exterior sheds, laundry rooms, or the exterior of the house, is most of those are going to be GFCI, and they wire up homes depending on when they were built and whom they were built by. They're going to be wired up weird, where sometimes you're going to have one GFCI leg, and it's going to cover 2 bathrooms, and the garage, and the laundry room, and the shed out back. So you want to go all around, especially if it does look like it could be a GFCI type of area, and just test and reset every GFCI you can find in that house. Oftentimes, the outlet you're working on, even if it's not GFCI, will just happen to be tapped into that same leg. So you've got your breaker, you've used your tester, and you've checked all the GFCIs. Once you've done all of that, the last step, if you didn't find what's wrong, is to physically pull the outlet from the wall, if your tester didn't already have you doing that. Pull the outlet from the wall and physically look at it. Look for burns, look for anything loose. Just check for condition and security and put it back if it's fine. And then go to the outlets that are closest and most adjacent to it and check those. Now, maybe 1 time out of 10, you're not going to figure out what's wrong. It's going to be something more complex that's inside the breaker panel or inside of the walls. If you're not a licensed electrician, which I'm not, don't go into the breaker panel other than flipping breakers, and don't start trying to get up inside the walls looking for junction boxes and stuff. If you go through all these steps and you don't know what it is, cut your losses, tell your property manager that this is out of your wheelhouse and they should send a professional electrician, a licensed electrician, and let him take care of it. And yes, you do have to cut your losses, but here's the thing. The other 9 times out of 10, you are going to figure out what's wrong just by following these steps. You're going to get it fixed very quickly, and because this was an electrical troubleshooting job that, again, they're not going to send to most handymen, because it's that, you can charge electricians rates. So you may have just plugged your tester in, and it told you that you had an open common, and so you pull the outlet out, you see that the common isn't quite attached, you screw it back in, 5 minutes, you charge $200 for that, because that's what an electrician would have charged, if not more. And it may be slightly complicated, so maybe you spend 15 to 25 minutes. But you'll go through all these troubleshooting steps within 25 minutes for sure. 9 times out of 10, you are going to figure out what it is just by these steps, and then you're going to charge at least $200 for that. So these actually get extremely profitable. One other little tip for outlets that don't work. Some places in the country, Tucson being one of them, it's very common to have an outlet on the wall that's controlled by a switch. And what you'll find is that one plug within that 2-plug outlet, one receptacle will not work and the other does work. If that one doesn't work, check your wall switches nearby and in the hallway and see if they turn that receptacle on, because they'll wire them up so that you're controlling a receptacle with a switch so that you can plug a lamp in. I don't like the setup, but it does exist. Keep that in mind. That's a little thing to look for. And then finally, for the bonus, this is really where the money can be. And I don't actually get many of these lately, but emergency jobs. Make it very clear to your property managers that you are open for emergency jobs, and make sure that every single time your phone rings, no matter how much you don't want to take a job, if it's that property manager and it's 9:30 at night, you know she's calling you because it's an emergency, because it's too late to call for anything else. Answer your phone and say yes and go do it. You will become her guy, the one that she trusts, the one that takes care of her, the one that she develops some loyalty to. and you're going to go to that job, and right off the bat, you're going to already have told them when you signed on with them that your trip fee is $125 and your emergency nights and weekends trip fee is $250, and you could even take it to $300. I feel a little greedy taking it to $300, so I try to stick it to $250. But the great thing is, for that $250, you're not expected to fix the entire problem. So let's say that a supply line to a kitchen faucet just blew in the middle of the night, and there's water squirting all over the kitchen, and they tried to turn the valve off and it wouldn't turn off, the handle broke, whatever. The water's still coming out, and they have to call you. So they call you, you go out there. All you need to do is get that water to stop coming out of that faucet. That's all you have to do tonight. You don't have to fix the valve, you don't have to fix the pipe, you don't have to replace, you don't need a working sink. Your job on an emergency nights and weekends call can be simply to show up and stop bad things from happening. Let's say there's a storm. One of my first ones I did was a storm that blew a window out. Something crashed into the window, broke the window, rain was getting into the house. Before I left my house, all I did was grab a giant sheet of plywood and my skill saw and some screws and a drill, and I went over to that house. I cut the plywood to roughly match the size of the window, just a little bit more, so I had something to screw into other than the window itself. Cut it to size, put it up on the window, popped my screws in it so that rain and wind weren't blowing into the house, and then I went and charged my $250. In fact, I think for that one I did charge $300, but like I said, I think that, depending on your area, that may be a little greedy. But these emergency jobs, more than anything, they develop loyalty with your property manager, because oftentimes, if not most times, most handymen don't want to do these emergency jobs. They don't want to leave home in the middle of the night, and they're just not going to answer their phone. And the trust and loyalty you can gain by answering your phone and saying yes is extremely valuable to your profits in the future. On top of that, like I said, all you need to do is stop the issue from happening. If it's 1 a.m., you can go out to the street, turn their water off, remind them they've only got one flush left in each toilet, schedule with them to show up at 9 a.m. the next day, charge $250 for turning the water off, go back home and go to bed, and then the next morning go show up and see about doing a proper fix, for which you will charge separately the way you would charge any job. So that's the most profitable handyman jobs, guys. I hope this is very helpful to you. Make sure that you know these jobs, make sure you have these materials on hand, because whether or not they're very profitable will depend on you not needing to take a trip to Home Depot. But these are all extremely common. These are your bread and butter. These are what's going to put money in the bank. So, now that we've gotten through all that, I love y'all. I hope you're all out there killing it, and I will see you on the next video.